Welcome to the Organic Advisor Call Series. I'm your host, Sam Oschwald Tilton. I'm the training specialist with OATS and also an independent organic advisor through my business, Glacial Drift Enterprises. Today's topic is organic biologicals and seed treatments, and we're fortunate to be joined by Dr. Sible and Brett Bell, who I'll introduce in a moment. But I do want to say that this series is brought to you by the Organic Agronomy Training Service at Albert Lea Seed House. Albert Lea is a fourth-generation, family-owned, independent farm seed company with a full line of organic and non-GMO field crop seed and knowledgeable reps that I always enjoy learning from. Thank you to Albert Lea for your support on this series, and we'll put a link now to their website in the chat if that's helpful. The Organic Agronomy Training Service, OATS, is a partnership between universities, agronomists, crop consultants, nonprofit educators, and industry reps from throughout the country. We're a collaboratively managed training program for the ag advisors who work with organic farmers, transitioning farmers, and my new favorite phrase, organic curious farmers. We provide science-based training for the people and businesses that support organic farmers. If your organization is interested in custom training on organic practices, please reach out to me. This is our 5th episode this season, and there are 2 whole past seasons of the series available on YouTube. In the chat right now, we'll put the link to the YouTube channel if that's something you want to look into and see all the great past episodes we've done. If you haven't done so already, I highly recommend signing up for the OATS newsletter mailing list just to keep up to date on our in-person and virtual training events and other resources that we put out. And again, we'll put the link in the chat there for that. Let me first introduce you to our guests. Dr. Sible, in his orange polo there, is a professor at University of Illinois. Connor's research program focuses on understanding how agronomic practices influence the plant microbiome interactions that drive nutrient cycling and crop productivity. And he uses field research to help farmers improve their yields, reduce risks, and ensure long-term profitability. And before the show, Connor told me that they're doing all their harvest right now for all their research plots. So thanks again for making the time, Connor. And we're also fortunate to have Brett Bell, who's the president and CEO of Albert Lea Seed. Brett joined Albert Lea Seed in August of 23 as the president and CEO. And prior to that, he held a number of leadership positions with different ag companies such as Anuvia Plant Nutrients, Landis Cooperative, and Cargill, I believe. Brett's a farm kid from Iowa and resides in Ames, Iowa with his wife and 3 sons. Okay. I'm going to start out by asking Connor and Brett generally how biologicals work, just so we all have some background, and then I'll pose to them the questions that you all asked when you registered. As we go, please feel free to ask further questions in the chat, and I'll incorporate them as best I can, but no guarantees since time flies when we're talking agriculture. Okay. Mr. Connor, could you please start us off by generally defining what are biologicals and how are they different than fertilizers?
Yeah, that's a great starting point. Biologicals is probably the term we hear utilized the most these days, whether it's in an ag media marketing article or from industries. You're seeing a lot of companies naming their acquisitions, main company and then biologicals division. The other term that is important to throw out there is biostimulants. Some may have heard that term. It's still a term in use, maybe a little older. I think maybe biostimulants was what started, and then it's transitioned now to we use biologicals more often. I bring that up because on the call, we may have some people that work with product development or registrations. And if you're talking legal, it's biostimulants, that's everything. But biologicals or biostimulants, especially back to your question about how do they compare with other inputs, right? The big inputs we know about in agriculture and my background is definitely row crop focus. Seed, right? You don't have a crop till you put seed in the ground. So that's a big bin of inputs. Nutrition, whether that's through conventional or organic fertilizers, we know nutrient management and nutrients is another big bin. And that's directly supplying the nutrients to the system. The other big bin then is the pest management. And then we get into specialty products, which would be this biological space. How are they different from the other products, especially from the nutritional side? They're generally not a direct nutrient addition. If it is a direct nutrient addition like NP or K in some form, that's fertility, thinking that size. Most biologicals are somehow enhancing nutrient availability or stimulating the cycling, back to where a lot of my background research is, but it's not a product that is directly the nutrient itself. Then the broader categories, most of these are microbial inoculants. If we really want to kind of boil it down, most biologicals are some sort of bacteria or fungal product Soybean inoculum's the great example most of us are familiar with in the long term. Then on the non-living side, though, there's other things like humic acids or alginates, amino acids. Sugars are kind of in the biostimulant for those that work with sugars. So it's these specialty inputs. But if I had to differentiate them from the others, they're not pest control. That there are some biocontrol. I think that maybe it'll come up later, but that's probably a different discussion. Um, and they're not direct additions of nutrients, and that's why they're different from the pesticide and or the fertilizer input categories.
Okay, thank you for that. And if anyone is slightly confused that they're not fertilizers, but they make fertility more available, we'll dive into that shortly. Connor, when you and I were talking earlier, you said one of the things driving interest in biologicals is they're so easy for farmers to try because of their relative low cost and their ease of application, right? Usually we don't have to take an extra pass to apply them. Can you just talk a little bit about a little more about how they are to apply and how that kind of drives interest?
Yeah, yep. These products, by and large, are probably a liquid or powder basis, which means quantity and volume are quite low. I mean, we're talking application rates in the ounces to maybe a gallon to 2 gallons per acre at the high end, but definitely small amounts to get the actives out there, which means they don't necessarily fill a whole tank or you don't need to take a whole spreader out. But with that, they're also making minor improvements on the farm, right? Fertilizer goes a long way, but a biological is probably that next hanging fruit, meaning we're usually putting them out there with some other application on the farm. Maybe they're going out with the manure, then we spread that, or with the planter, if it's some sort of a planter box treatment or a seed treatment. If you have in furrow, it's going out with the planter. And then if you're doing any sort of in-season spray type applications, can we use the sprayer to carry it along? But by and large, it's that free ride of application that gives these products their best value. They're almost always going with something you have to do on the farm. Back to planting. You have to plant. Planter has to run across every acre. Can we get something else out with that pass? And then the general cost for most of these products are in that $10 to $20 an acre range. That's largely the foliar or the in furrow, maybe. Seed treatments are even less. So cost of product is quite significantly low compared to some of the other inputs that we have on the farm.
Okay. And is that right? At least, I believe most of your research is in conventional, but you were saying that if farmers can see a 1 to 2 bushel per acre yield bump for beans, that can pay for a lot of biologicals. If they can see a 2 to 3 bushel per acre bump for corn, that's enough to kind of make these pay. Does that sound right?
That does, right? I mean, if you think, say we've got $10 beans, 2 bushels, $20, and if that product cost you 12, there's your return, assuming the diesel was covered through some sort of other application. And then on corn, right, in the more $4 market, that 3 bushel range, now today's market, maybe it's 5 bushels. But that comes down to just cost of product versus the return you get.
Yep. Okay. And then, again, I think many things from conventional ag are super helpful and organic, and some things aren't. So I also wanted to ask Brett, when you're thinking about a farmer buying a seed treatment, a biological seed treatment, how do you see the cost of biologicals and their yield impact and kind of the ROI penciling out for producers?
Sam, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today. The best way, I think, to answer that question is how we look at microbials as it pertains to solving problems for our customers, specifically seed treatment. I do like the comment Dr. Sible made about having that biological hitch a ride with some other application. So in the case of the work that we've been doing, we're trying to get it on the seed. And in essence, it's hitching a ride with the planter. And so we launched a microbial last year. It was a custom treatment that actually it was a biopesticide. And so it had some pesticidal activity, which means we could only use it on organic acres with the certification approval. And the grower had to work through that. We can come back to that later. But as we were looking at how to price that product, we had several years of yield data to back up the value that was created. And then we took a step back and said, all right, what's a fair price to charge? And we believe the farmer should get at least half that value. And so in the case of this particular seed treatment, there was about $80, $85, $90 worth of value in a bag. And so we priced it at about $45 to the grower. So they get half that value. And then between Albert Lee and the channel that's supporting us, we took the other half of that value. And as we think about launching new microbials, specifically on seed, we think that's the right ratio that we should come to market with. But it all starts with the value creation. And if I
Yeah.
could go back to a comment Connor made on defining microbials, he did a really nice job of defining microbials. The only thing I would add that might help your listeners when they think about microbials on their farm is start with what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah.
And when we think about microbials, we like to define them as nature's little problem solvers. Microbials are everywhere on everything. And the ones that are used in ag and the ones that perform best usually have a specific problem they're trying to solve. And so as a farmer, when you look to use microbials, be sure to start there is what problems am I trying to solve? And then what microbials are available to help me solve those.
Yeah. And so I think that's a perfect segue to another question for Connor is, okay, we're thinking about the big picture of biologicals, what they do, how they act. And then now the rubber hits the road of a farmer or advisor needs to pick a biological. Connor, can you talk through what are the different problems that these biologicals can solve? What are the different kind of categories of biologicals that a farmer or advisor might look into?
Yeah, and it goes full circle to how do they differentiate from other inputs? Pesticides is a great example. I mean, if it's a herbicide, it kills weeds. And it does it, it's a grass killer, a broadleaf killer, fungicide, it kills certain diseases there. Biostimulants, biologicals can be a very wide range, and they can do a lot of different things. And so that's important to remember first is what does that product do? The big categories, and maybe we'll walk through chronologically as we've seen this go. Bradyrhizobium for soybean often I think gets excluded from the conversation, but I like to use that as that's like the original biological. That's
Nice. Yeah.
nitrogen fixation in soybean, or then others inoculate peanuts with different strains. So that's one aspect, thinking nutrient improvement, helping with the fixation side. And what really started to kick off this biological market in the last 5 to 7 years has been that concept for grass crops like corn or wheat. Nitrogen fixing microbial inoculants for the grass
Yeah.
crops that don't traditionally do that naturally. There's some products on market in there. So N fixation would be the first big category that kind of started.
Okay.
Quickly behind that was phosphorus solubilization, especially in organic systems, a lot of manure. I mean, your soils are loaded with phosphorus. The problem is it's usually in a form the plant can't use today. Can we help unlock it and release it faster? And microbes do that job. Can we apply a microbe to do it a little faster than the native ones do? So phosphorus solubilization would be the second big thing to think about what a product might do. Then the third area we're seeing probably the most rapid growth today is this residue degradation space. Putting the microbial inoculums on your residues to help them break down faster. There's a couple reasons why this is taking off, right? No-till acres are on the rise. That's more residue. Cover crops are coming back. That's more residue. And our producers are doing a really good job at growing crops, and their yields are up. And for every bushel we produce, something else is going out the back end of the combine. And
Right.
that ratio is pretty consistent. And we have not increased yield with the same amount of stover biomass and plant biomass. They go up together. So for every bushel your average goes up, you've got more residue back into the fields. And that's what's really driving the residue decomposition space. That's what I see on the microbial side, biologicals, as the three main categories.
Okay.
And then, as Brett brought up, biopesticides, there's a lot of microbials that are targeting pest management in a biological manner, not a chemical manner. So that's the other big bin. But on the bionutrition side, it's those three categories.
Okay, so something like nitrogen inoculants, phosphorus solubilizers, residue degraders, and then maybe if we want to include biopesticides, something like that. And then if I hear both you and Brett right, if we're working with a farmer, we don't want to just say, hey, like try this, it has good data. We want to have some idea of like, hey, this is an issue you have, this is a problem, and this is a solution that this particular biological can offer. We're not, just doing a shotgun approach or something. One question I wanted to ask at this point from a lot of the listeners is, each farm is unique. And are there, if someone's choosing a biological, let's say they know, hey, I want to work on my residue or phosphorus, whatever that is, are there specific factors that farmers should be aware of when they're choosing a biological that works for them? Something like, should they worry about their soil type, sand or high CEC clay? Should they be thinking about particular crop species, whether it's a certain hybrid of corn or just corn versus beans? Should they be thinking about their geographical location? Or is it easy as, hey, these microbes have a wide band in which they work, they're commercialized, we don't really need to worry about that. How does someone think through that?
Yeah, I can definitely start on that, and then Brett, feel free to tack on with your perspective, especially from the environment perspective. I'm down in East Central Illinois. That's a very different world from some of our northern states, and then even our southern states as you get more warmer in that regard. I mean, the first thing, yes, there is going to be some range on there, but some microbial species are more common than others. Right? Some of these microbes are present in almost all soils. And the
Right.
concept behind a biological, one of the questions I often get is why would I pay for a microbe if I've already got billions of them in my soil? And the idea is we've isolated which ones may be having, the biggest impact or potential impact to your system, but we concentrate them, we formulate them into these inoculants, and then when we apply them, it's like just overwhelming with that microbial in that space to try and get a head start on natural process. Back to though, where do we start? Things to consider. Start back at your basics. I don't know of any biological product today that will fix your pH. I mean, if you
Uh,
have a pH problem on the farm, we need to get that settled first because then the plants will be happier and then the microbes maybe have a better chance of making an effect on it. So make sure the basics are covered and then back to exactly the comments, figuring out what it is we're trying to improve and finding the right tool for that job, just like in any agronomics scenario.
okay. Brett, did you want to add anything? Otherwise, I would ask kind of a related organic specific question.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, I mean, generally speaking, we should expect microbials to perform differently based on the environment that they're in. And we've got a wide audience here today that services even a wider audience of growers. To the extent, as a trusted advisor, you can fall back on whoever's advising you on that particular microbial. Oftentimes that's the manufacturer. Can you get your hands on some data and really understand the performance relative to your area of adaptation? That's key. And I think that, if there's one message that your listeners should take home today is they play an important role as a trusted advisor for their growers. So to the extent they can get educated, whatever way that presents itself on how those microbials work in their particular environment, that's going to be really important to helping the farmer make the right decision.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So related question in terms of, as an advisor, if I'm thinking through what's the data on this product and is it going to be helpful for a farmer? Conventional ag the market is so much bigger than organic that a lot of these products and the data on these products is taken in conventional systems. And so it seems to me, I wouldn't always want to assume that because a study says it works in a conventional soil that may be a lot less biologically active, that it's going to be helpful in an organic system. And so, in conventional, generally nutrients are going out without carbon, right? But in organics, mostly our nutrients are going out with carbon in the form of manure or root exudates from cover crops, et cetera. And so maybe those biologicals are going to be less effective on an organic farm. Yeah, any thoughts on kind of how to make a lot of the conventional data applicable for an organic system?
So, Dr. Sible, why don't I take a shot at that? I think any data is a good place to start as long as it comes from a trusted source. And so if you're trying to apply conventional data to organic systems, which we do at Our Really Seed House, fully 2/3 of our portfolio is expressly designed to support that organic grower. We'll start there, but then we work really hard to validate that with our own work. As you and I were preparing for this, Sam, I mentioned the project we stood up 2 years ago called Trusted Insights, where we partnered with, actually took an equity stake in a contract researcher, and we're doing the work ourselves in an effort to validate what we're seeing from the manufacturer, the developer of the product. And this product I mentioned that we launched last year, it was really exciting to see our data was almost identical to what we saw from the manufacturer, which is
Nice.
and we didn't expect anything other than that, but it was just a nice Nice thing to see in a firm, and we tested it over frankly, a little bit broader area. We tested it across 25 locations, about a third of the Midwest. And so that's where we start. If whatever data you can get your hands on, then if you can validate that with your current systems, that's what we're doing. But as a grower, again, if you find yourself in the same situation, I think you can try it on your farm, but make sure you're conservative right off the bat.
Yeah.
And then you can supplement that data with your own real life farm data over time. But you need to start with, again, what is the problem you're trying to solve, and can this biological help you do that?
Let me put a question to Connor just on that. There's nothing like on-farm research. And Connor, you told me I want to turn this into a rap lyric, but you told me a nice saying, check strips, not field splits, in terms of, when you're using a new product, how to know if it's really working on your soil, your geography, et cetera. Can you say a little more what you mean by that? Check strips, not field strips, and what are like basic practices for farmers, that they can do so that at the end of the year, they can see on their yield monitor, hey, did this have a return on investment for me?
Yeah, and I can touch kind of on how do you can translate the data from conventional to organic. I'm what I call myself a crop physiologist. What does the physiology mean is there's a story there. There's a mechanism with any agronomic input. When we put that into the field, some sort of chain reaction happens to get us to a plant response. Especially on the microbial side, the microbes can do a lot of things, and some of these microbial species are very specific. Bradyrhizobium, we know exactly what that does. Associates with soybean, creates those nodules, fixes nitrogen. A very specific mechanism involved with that active. Some of these biologicals are a little more generic. Some of the bacillus can do a lot of different things, and maybe if they're in a cover crop system, they're going to have primary mechanism A, but then you throw them into a conventional system, maybe primary mechanism B comes to light. But when I look at data behind products, I want to know the story. How does that product work? What's it do in the system? And then does the data validate the mechanism? We can look at in-season data, canopy closure, for accelerated growth type. But if that story follows through, then there's a good chance that you can figure out how does that mechanism work on my acre or my farm, or if that's the mechanism there, does that translate to the organic systems? That then, though, comes into, this is any agronomic input, whether it's biologicals, nutritional. There are so many different ways to farm every single acre. We know neighbor to neighbor, they're going to farm differently, but we know not everyone farms every acre in their own system the same way. So you just have to validate some things as you go through on your farm and check strips, not split fields. A lot of times, and I get it, easy, right? So in the time, especially planting, it's pressure to get everything in the ground. And these days, it seems like fewer days to do it. And you can get in a rush, and sometimes it's the easy ways, first half the field without, dump the product in, and then the second half with. But then you got to have a really uniform field to trust the average of the left side of the field versus the average of the right.
Because you're saying it could be something else throwing it off. Maybe the pH is different, organic matter or whatever.
Yep, exactly. Or one side has more headlands as a component of it than the other. And so check strips. Maybe instead of do half and half, you just go every other pass and then put the product in and backfill every other pass. So now you have replication throughout the field of with product or without product. And with today's technology and yield monitors, you can extract that data pretty good and group it and do it by row if you know your planter width or your harvest width. So that's what we mean by check strips, not split fields, is try and get at least a couple side-by-sides in the same field and not just left side versus right side, north half versus south half type comparisons. Now that will be better than nothing, but definitely some places leave the product out and get your eyes on some aspects where you didn't have it to make sure it's working for you.
Okay. Let's keep kind of diving into the details. A big excitement I hear from farmers is using biologicals to reduce their fertilizer rate. And on the one hand, it seems like it makes sense. We're saying it makes, phosphorus more available, et cetera. Is this a good plan to use biologicals to reduce your fertilizer rate?
So I'll touch on that with what we see in our data. And again, we're talking East Central Illinois, 3.5% organic matter soils, pretty good inherent fertility. Largely, it's the nitrogen side we hear that recommendation, because if we're having biological that pulls it out of the air, does that mean we need less with the fertilizer? In general, what our data shows is we don't want to pull back our nutrients up front. Our crops are smarter than we give them credit for. And when that corn is V3, V4, it's already reaching out into its environment and assessing how much nitrogen and phosphorus it has to work with. And it starts to set its ceiling. If we pull back the fertilizer early, the crop might read that and say, whoa, you gave me 20 units nitrogen less than you did last year. You really think I'm going to perform the same way? I'm going to lower my ceiling, right? It's going to use the resources it has.
Sounds like a teenager or something.
Exactly. Yep. And they just kind of go with what you give them and make the most out of it. So in the end fixers today, keep that in mind. This is with what today's market shows. It's a third source of nitrogen. We've done the studies to document these things are pulling nitrogen out of the air and putting them in the plant. But a lot of that happens early season, and it's a very long growing season, especially corn thinking perspective. We need nitrogen availability all season long, and newer hybrids are taking nitrogen up longer into the season than they used to. A lot of it used to, we take the nitrogen up in the early stages and then we remobilize it from the leaves later. They still do that, but they're still continually pulling from the soil at the same time. So what we see is if you pull the nitrogen rates back, and this is just thinking broadcast up front pre-plant, the plant senses that it might lower the ceiling. And then, or you have a really, really good year and you could have pulled 275, but because we didn't give enough nitrogen, maybe we're only going to pull 245 in some of those soils. It's a third source of nitrogen. And the reason on nitrogen this is so important, I guess I'll kind of summarize here as I go off my tangent. We have two sources of nitrogen for our crops. It's what the soil provides or what we give it via either it's manure or fertilizer, two sources. And usually in most years, one of those two sources might let you down a little bit. Either the soil doesn't mineralize enough and it doesn't provide its portion, or what we input is somehow lost or tied up and it's not giving its fraction. If we could put a third source of nitrogen, then maybe that would help us where the other two sources fall short. Or if we're over applying 15, 20 units of insurance units, maybe we can pull the insurance units off and then that microbe goes there. So that's on the nitrogen side because what we put out there is suspect to being lost. We can't control that. The second we pull it back, if we have a heavy loss here, we've lost even more. So it's a riskier scenario. 10 years from now, I may have a totally different opinion, right? New microbes, new tweaks, different ways to formulate them. Now maybe they can really provide a lot more significant portions of that nutrition. On the phosphorus side, it's not that the phosphorus is lost from the field. It's just in a form that's unavailable. So maybe we could reduce phosphorus inputs if we're enhancing the release from what's in the soil. And that's the big difference between N and P. N could be physically gone from the field, just environment. Phosphorus, it's usually still there. It's just tied up. So we're on the idea of making your inputs more efficient, but not pulling them back.
I see why, as a plant physiologist, you see your role as sort of a storyteller. And when we were talking earlier, you kind of told me the story about fertilizing like a race. You can sprint the first few miles. Could you tell that story or just kind of make the connection? That was helpful for me to just kind of understand it.
Yeah, a lot of inputs go out early, right? I mean, usually once canopy closes, we're not doing too much else in the season. So a lot of upfront management. And what we tend to see is if you give that plant a really big boost early, it's usually bigger and stronger and healthier than the untreated comparisons. In the 3 mile races, it's like you got a head start on that race and you are ahead of the competition at mile 1. But you're feeling too confident and you skip the Gatorade table and the water table at the mile marker and you keep going. But everyone behind you maybe stopped at the Gatorade pool table and got their Gatorade and their water. By mile 2, you're starting to run out of gas, and everyone that then restocked keeps going, and then by mile 3, they've caught up and surpassed you. If you go for it with the product or an input up front, you do have to have season-long management to capitalize on that. And stopping at the Gatorade table in this case means side dressing some units of nitrogen, but not necessarily trying to pull them back, or ensuring we've got pest management in place. And in a drought, you're not giving up too early. So if you put all this effort up front, you can't give up on it, or you can't short the crop in the reference of fertilizer replacement.
Okay, so we're trying to understand what do biologicals actually do, but we also don't want to kind of put too much reliance on them where we're ignoring other kind of fertilizing basics.
Yeah, we tend to see that these biologicals, they can work, and they more often today are making good systems even better and more efficient. rather than trying to replace something that our producers have already figured out.
I love that biologicals making good systems even better. Like it's not like you said, they're not going to fix your pH or something.
Yep.
Are you finding this conversation useful? Hit the thumbs up button to help others discover it too. And if you'd like more conversations like this, click subscribe and turn on the bell icon for notifications. If we can dive a little bit more into organic specific, Brett, we're lucky to have you because you're focused on developing an OMRI listed biological seed coating for organic corn. Can you tell us kind of what's your North Star? What are you guys trying to do? And this is just going to be a big question. Sorry, take it where you want. And also, what are you learning in the process? Because you're working with all these, international biologicals companies. Yeah, what are you guys trying to do there, and what are you learning in the process?
Yeah, so I would start off by saying we believe that advanced microbials probably will carry a better ROI in the organic community than they will in the conventional, simply because the organic grower doesn't have as many tools as the conventional grower does. But we started off, what problems are we trying to solve? And then how do we use advanced microbials to solve them? And our primary objective today is canopy speed for the corn farmer. So when you think about an organic corn grower, they don't have, again, back to the tools, they don't have the hard chemistry to use that a conventional grower does. And so can we find microbials that will help that crop get up out of the ground? So the first step is emergence. And then the second step is get to canopy quicker so that it can outcompete the environment. In this case, it's weed pressure. And so with that as the North Star, we went out and visited with a number of manufacturers of these advanced microbials. And oftentimes what you find, and Dr. Sible mentioned this earlier, the market in fact, it was before we even started, the market isn't as big in organics as it is in conventional farming. I mean, it's a fraction. So consequently, it's not as interesting. But one of the things that we found as we've engaged with some of these manufacturers of advanced microbials is if you give them a clear objective, again, what's the problem we're trying to solve, and help them understand the opportunity that could exist, they've actually been pretty quick to jump in and help us sort this out. And so we're testing 8 to 10 different treatments, again, with the express purpose of helping that crop get to canopy quicker, and in doing so, help that organic farmer solve one of the biggest problems they have, and that's weed control. Obviously, yield is still really important. And after just a couple years of work, what we're finding, although preliminary, is it looks like those microbials, some do help this crop get going quicker and get out of the ground and get to canopy faster. They also tend to be the ones that yield the best. So is that cause and effect, or are we just getting lucky? So far, we don't know. It's still early. The other thing that we're finding is, on the basis of being a microbial, nature's little problem solvers, you would suspect that they could fit an organic system right away because they tend to be naturally occurring in the environment. Oftentimes, the manufacturing process itself will nullify the ability to use those microbes on an organic acre. And so if you could be a student of what caused that microbial to not be able to be used on an organic acre, is there an opportunity to go back and reformulate in such a way that you can now use it? So we're just starting to have those conversations, but we think there's an opportunity there as well. But in short, Sam, there's just not very many microbials that fit on an organic acre, simply because of the manufacturing process disqualifies them.
And I think, Daniel, thanks for your question. I'll get to that in just a moment. Brett, when you and I were talking, you said that it's really important that your seed coating be approved without restrictions by OMRI. And maybe everyone else is clear on this, but to me, it was an important detail, the difference between with restrictions or without. Could you talk about what that means in organic and why you feel like it's a lot more helpful for farmers to have unrestricted OMRI products?
Yeah, the primary difference between restricted and unrestricted, if it's a restricted product, usually it's EPA registered, it tends to be a biopesticide of some sorts, and the only way you can use it is if your certifier allows you to, and usually you're trying to demonstrate a hardship that you can't address in the absence of this product. And so through that process, oftentimes the certifier will allow you to use it on your farm, and it gets written into the organic systems plan for that particular operation. But that's a farmer by farmer, field by field exercise. And so when we think about commercializing products as a seed company, and we sell seed in all 50 states, we like solutions, i.e. Army certified without restrictions, that can go on any acre at any time without the need to get a certifier involved. It's just a much easier thing for the grower to do, and it's an easier thing for us to commercialize. Now we do carry both, but if it's with restrictions, a seed treatment with restrictions, I mentioned earlier the one we launched last year. It was a limited run. We only put it on a few hybrids. We give growers a certain amount of time to order it. There's no returns generally because
Right.
we can't take it back. And so we can do it. It just raises the bar in terms of complexity and the ability to get to the farmer. So we're not giving up on those. We prefer those that are without restrictions because they're a solution for every acre.
Okay. And then kind of related to the seed treatments, question from the listeners is, have you or Connor found a preference for either dry or liquid seed treatments in terms of efficacy? Is it just kind of based on whatever the manufacturer says? How should people think about, yeah, do we want dry or liquid seed treatments?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, you'll probably get a little better performance out of liquid. All in. One of the things that you need to think about when you're using a dry versus a liquid is the actual environment whereby you're treating. If you're using a dry, sometimes it can dust up a little bit. You need to think about that operator. Liquid, oftentimes that isn't the case. The other thing we're finding, Sam, is as we get further into this, there's actually some polymers out there that if you incorporate those with your seed treatments, they lock in those actives with much more consistency, and they actually perform better in the field. So just the presence of a polymer could help, which I don't believe there's a solution like that available in the dry space. I could be missing something. So we tend to like liquids better, but I can tell you from a cost storability standpoint, usually dries are a little friendlier. So you got to
Okay.
weigh the pros and cons of those two.
Okay. Another question in terms of, actually using these biologicals from Ashley, who's in Indiana, is how long do they stick around for? Like, are these, depending on the strain, are these something that once you put them there, they're colonizing your soil and, barring some, toxic spill, they're going to be there for 20 years, or they're maybe going to increase, or do you need to be reapplying them every year? Connor, I don't know if there's research on that, but how do we understand how these things stick around or don't?
Yeah, I mean, on that end, we're still tracking that down. Once they're in the field, it can be hard to find them maybe and track them. Companies that sell them often have, maybe genetic tag that they could isolate from the soil. But then that's their IP and their patent. So that's not just something you can generically send to a lab and say, is that product I've applied 3 years in a row still there? Depending on the company you're working with, they may or may not, be willing to look at that. Touching a little bit on efficacy, on where we see maybe most consistent or best. I mean,
Yeah.
seed treatment or in furrow in our world tends to be the more consistent responses versus something that goes out foliar or wide drop in season. And that just makes sense because for the first 7 to 10 days, there's the seeds are on germination and emergence autopilot, sort of, right? I mean, they're not fully tapping into their environment. They have a process that they go through. If you can influence that in the root zone right at that time, you're more consistent to get back to what the story of that product does on that at germination, emergence, and from the get-go. And then the longer you go into the season, the more environmental factors come in, the more variable the season comes this year versus last year. So the efficacy gets a little more inconsistent trying to hone in on what factors are interfering. So we do tend to see seed treatment or planter applied is more consistent in response. And I think it comes down to it's affecting the plant at the time it's making key decisions, and it's always making those decisions on that side. Then back to the inoculation, you hear this about soybean inoculum in a lot of our fields. We've done soybean corn rotation for so long. soybean inoculum, seeing a response on that seems to be a coin toss for a lot of folks. And when they do see it, it's not very large because the idea is there's enough natural native inoculum out there. A lot of unknowns on that, Ashley, for that question about how much, I think the microbial space is just building now to really better understand longer term repeat use implications. The best bet I could maybe hedge on, and this is, a guess, best educated guess, so don't put this as a Connor said exactly this, but thinking like no-till systems, if you're repeat inoculating with fungal, maybe eventually those fungal hyphae do establish themselves. But no-till is because you're not disturbing it, and those hyphae can establish and then re-inoculate.
Right.
You're in heavily cultivated systems. I would not expect a fungal inoculant to actively persist over time because as you cultivate, you break up the hyphae, and they don't get a good chance to fully establish a large network. Reinoculation may make more sense there. And then on the bacterial side, there's just so many bacteria out there. I don't know if you can overwhelm the system for an extended period of time. Eventually, it might go back to equilibrium. And then if you reapply in a concentrated form in the future, it's like giving you that other burst for that activity, but eventually it probably equilibrizes out and you need to resupply would be my guess comparing the bacterial versus fungal. But again, an agronomist, crop physiologist, not fully yet microbial ecologist. We're being expected to understand that better as we learn, right? And we're always learning, but that would be my general take. Is heavily cultivated systems, fungal, probably gonna have to reinoculate. Bacteria, again, I think there's just so many out there. It's a spike, but then we got to keep respiking it would be my guess.
Okay. I want to ask Brett a question kind of related to microbial communities. Before I do, I'll just kind of remind the audience, I would say you're really lucky in being able to pose questions here to Connor and Brett through the chat. So feel free to keep doing that. Brett, when you and I were talking earlier, you were telling me about, all the different biological companies around the world you're kind of dealing with to find out what's really going to work for your growers. And you introduced me to the term microbial consortia. And you were kind of saying, well, we sell to farmers in all 50 states. Can you say more about what is microbial consortia as it relates to a product that works for people?
Yeah, so when that term is used, it implies there's more than one microbial in the product. There's products out there. There's some phosphorus solubilizers, for instance, that will carry multiple strains. Some strains work better in hot, dry. Some strains work better in cold, wet. And so if you combine those two, you in essence cover your bases regardless of whether you're planting in Minnesota or Southern Illinois, Central Illinois, where Dr. Sible's at, you more than likely have an answer because that product contains a whole host of microbials. And it's not an uncommon strategy. When companies market their products, oftentimes you want to be a little critical of how many are in the consortia. Sometimes that can raise the price because those bugs aren't free. And so we're looking for more pure play products that have fewer in their makeup. That way we think you can keep the cost down, and then you just do a better job of positioning those where they make the most sense.
And I might touch on that. It's a great example. Each microbial species, for those that need, it's the active ingredient. And how many active ingredients are you comfortable being in one product is a way to think about it. Back to kind of where we started also, I like to circle back often. We asked about, how do you know what may or may not be a good product, or how do you start? And if whoever has that product knows why they picked the microbes they did for a consortium, if they're going beyond 2 or 3, that's huge. And you get a great example, Brett. I mean, we know this one is for hot and dry. This one's for cold and wet. You have the story. You explain why both are needed in those scenarios. If a product has 10 microbes and somebody says, well, we know we need all 10, and they can't say why beyond that, there's your red flags. But I really like the explanation about, if you have to know why those two and how they differ, there's the story that I was asking for earlier. So,
okay, this is helpful. I feel like sort of part of our episode is just preparing the listeners of what questions to ask to a manufacturer. Yeah. Well, and maybe actually just to that point, Connor, I love asking this question. Props to John Kemp. He's the one who introduced me to asking. Connor, what do you feel like farmers or ag advisors often don't know about biologicals? When you're talking to people, what do you feel like they're often missing? or what assumptions might they be making?
Yep. That's a great question. What they don't know. I think a lot of it comes down to how the product works. I mean, nitrogen input, we know it's supplying nitrogen or phosphorus. We're supplying phosphorus. On the microbial side, there's a lot of them out there, and they're all coming to market quick. And I'll use bacillus as an example. There are a lot of bacillus actives out there. But these microbes are genus species. So Bacillus is the genus, but what's the species do? Is it the subtilis, the Leishmaniasis, the Amylocophacians? You can keep going down the list. Don't just assume one bacillus is all bacillus. No,
Yeah.
that bacillus has a species and that does something. And within there, as Brett highlighted, sometimes they even go to the strain level. And you can have the same genus species in a different strain level. So just don't assume, oh, bacillus, I know what that does. Really, which microbe do we have? It's an individual. How does that individual perform? Is probably the biggest thing. Don't assume what the microbe does. Really make sure we know.
Okay. Could you talk more, when you and I were talking earlier, again, you said, well, some of these might be actual live microbes, but some might be the metabolites. I don't know, the poop or the hormones from those microbes. And given that, you might want to store them differently. Could you say a little bit about what people might need to know or ask questions about the kind of handling or compatibility? And Brett, feel free to chime in as you want.
First question, is it alive or is it dead? Right? I mean, right off the bat, that thinks about how you handle it. Okay, it's alive. Does it need refrigeration or can it sit on the shelf? Okay, if it's on the shelf, can it be in the window or does it need to be in the shade, right? Constant. These are just thinking storage. If it's dead, there's a lot more flexibility in that because you can't kill something already there and you're just preserving the actives that are in there. That's probably where you start. Then from there, you think of your operation. Is it compatible with my manure slurry? Or is that manure slurry going to have some things that are just too hot for this microbe, but your other microbe is in a spore form that's more durable and it can handle the manure? So thinking about the types of questions, how to handle it, how to store it, and then how to use it with your production system, because everybody's going to have something slightly different. We're spreading it over the top. We're knifing it in. Okay, does the product work the same way for that application method? Yes or no? Just start asking questions, and then if they can't answer them, try something else maybe. But yeah.
Okay. And
Brett,
Brett, if I understand what you guys are trying to do, you're kind of trying to make that question unnecessary and just kind of push the easy button for growers. Does that sound right? Or I don't know, how easy can you actually make it in terms of what are the needs of these microbial products so that they stay effective?
We don't think it's much easier for the farmer than putting it on the seed and just letting them plant, which is what they do all day, every day in the spring. And so that to us is the definition of easy. And so when we go out and engage in discussions around these microbials, that's one of the three questions we ask. The three questions are, can it go on seed? Is it Army certified without restrictions? And can we get a 2-year shelf life? Meaning if we put it on the seed corn in season 1 and it comes back, which seed corn does, it doesn't all take a one-way ticket. Oftentimes there's a percentage that comes back. We prefer not to retreat. So can we get 2 years shelf life? And that right away disqualifies a lot of these microbials. And so we're taking a universe of nature's little problem solvers, and we're constantly ratcheting those down again for the problem we're trying to solve. And that is, in this case, canopy speed for the organic grower. And in doing so, we just don't have a lot to work with in the end of the day.
Yeah.
We think that's going to get better over time. I've been really pleased at how many of these microbials we've been able to discover that frankly aren't even being used in the way that we want to use them. It just takes someone going out and having conversations with these manufacturers and helping them understand the opportunities there.
I feel like that's helpful for advisors to hear that a seed treatment that's been already vetted by a seed dealer might be the easiest for their growers, and that's super valuable. But at the same time, because of some of the just kind of commercial limitations you're saying that seed houses have in terms of returns and needing something to last for 2 years, there might be something that's more effective out there, but it might be more of a pain to apply, and that's
right.
just a trade-off for the grower.
That's right. Now, I'll tell you, one of the emerging markets is these planter box treatments. So it feels like what's old is new. So back in the 80s, when I grew up on the farm, that was a very common thing, treating the planter box itself. that went away. Now it's back in vogue, and there's actives out there, and Dr. Silva can probably speak to this, that if you could get them on the seed at planting, they'll perform better than over the top. Certainly over the top because they're exposed to the environment, but oftentimes that wasn't a practical solution. Well, now that we're going back to the way we used to do things, i.e. planter box treatments, some of these actives are now back in the game, so to speak. So that's an emerging market that we think makes sense. We're not currently doing any research in that area, but it is something that a lot of growers are starting to do.
Okay. I wanted to share with the listeners, Dr. Sible, to my mind, has some wonderful resources out there for people that are research-based. And we'll put those in the chat now, but he's got an article on understanding biologicals. We'll put that in the chat. There's a video presentation he's got that he made about biologicals, and then also some slides. So those will be in the chat. As that's helpful for you, feel free to take a look at those. And then we'll also put in a brief kind of survey. It should take you, I don't know, 60 seconds of what you learned today or what you wish you would have learned, so that we can do better. I want to take a moment to thank Brett and Connor so much for your time in working with me and sharing your experience with all of us on this Organic Advisor Call series. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Yeah. Well, this is the 5th Organic Advisor Call of this 2025 series. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it did something for you. And please keep asking questions, sending me emails of what you want to learn about. And that's my job, and I enjoy trying to get you that. We'll hope to see you for the next episode, Tuesday, October 14th, when our topic will be organic fertilizer and manure. How much? How are we deciding as advisors how much our farmers need to apply to make a crop and also pay the bills well? We'll be speaking with an organic agronomist and a farmer. And until then, I wish you a safe summer and just enough rain through harvest. So thanks a lot for joining.